Hello, everybody. I'm Raul Fernandez, Select Board Member and Chair of the Task Force to Reimagine Policing in Brookline. This is our Task Force meeting for November 13th, 2020. I'm joined as always by our able Task Force members and staff supporting our work. Thanks to all of you for your continued work, diligent work at these meetings and beyond, subcommittees and elsewhere. We've got a great agenda set for today. I'll just run us through it really quickly, just so folks have an understanding of what we'll be doing today. And then we'll get right into it. We've got an opportunity once again for any announcements or updates from members of the task force. Then we'll approve the meeting minutes from Friday, November 6th, see if you have any updates or edits to those. We do have an update on the policing survey, which we'll provide and answer any questions about that. There'll be subcommittee updates per usual, and I've already gotten, you see in the packet that there are a couple of sort of interim subcommittee reports that I got a chance to read through, very excited about. And we'll also talk about the format for subcommittee reports and recommendations as we move forward, like what is it exactly we're looking for, make sure that we're hitting all the spots as we work toward our final report from this task force, and then any opportunity for new business that there might be. Okay, so let's get started with any announcements or updates from members of the task force. Okay, hearing none. One day you'll have one. It's okay. We're going to keep that on the agenda. Hearing none, we are going to go into the question of approving the meeting minutes from Friday, November 6, 2020. Does anyone have any updates to those minutes? They haven't already provided to Devin. All right. So we're going to go ahead and vote on that. As always, it'd be helpful if you can unmute. So this is a question of approving the meeting minutes from Friday, November 6, 2020. Let's see, going from the left to the right up here, I see Malcolm.
Yes, approved.
Okay, Anne?
Yep.
Bonnie?
Yes.
Kristen?
Yes.
Chi-Chi?
Yes.
Alexander?
Yes.
Amas?
Yes.
Eitan?
Yep.
Mike?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. Great, thank you everybody. Moving right along. Now we have the policing survey update. For those just joining us, we are working with Tufts University on a survey to study attitudes of the residents of Brookline around policing within Brookline. And there are about 25,000 invitations going out to Brookline residents to participate in this survey. I see that this week we put out a press release to indicate to residents that that was happening, and that also we request their participation in that. So if they get that invite in their literal mailboxes, that they actually respond to that survey. I see also that it was picked up in the Brookline Patch in an article that I read that seemed very accurate. And so I encourage people to check that out as well. Eitan, what else do we know about when this survey might be hitting folks' mailboxes? Should that be relatively soon?
I just sent an email asking that very question. I think last we heard they're going out, yesterday, today. I'll probably by the end of this meeting, I'll know and be able to update that. My guess is if they do get to people's houses on, say, Monday, then again, we'll probably expect about 80% of them to come in 2 weeks from the time that they're delivered.
Okay.
80% of the people who will answer within a couple of weeks.
Right. So we'll continue to encourage people to respond to that. If they get that, we'll make sure to mention that from the select board. If others are in other meetings, I know many of you participate in lots of areas of life in and around Brookline. If you can help with spreading the word about that too, that'd be great. And I do want to say a thanks to members of the Envisioning and Community Engagement subcommittee for helping craft the language for the release to let folks know about this. Thank you for that. Anything else or any other questions on that survey?
Sorry, where on the web, how hard is it if you're a citizen and you're just Googling like, survey, Brookline policing survey, what kind of hoops do you have to jump through to navigate to that press release on the website?
Well, that's a fine question. Devin, do you know where that appears on the website?
Sorry, yes, I'm putting it in the chat now for all panelists and attendees. It's actually on our COVID-19 site, but I'm going to put the press release on the front page of our homepage at brooklinema.gov as well, underneath the newsflash section. But if you just Google Brookline Task Force Survey, I think it's like the second or third to come up in a regular Google search. And then it's under the news section on brooklinecovid19.com.
And Devin, if someone calls the town hall and will whoever answers I don't know how, where they would call, but are the staff aware of this so they know that this is like a real thing?
So the select board's office will know that. And I think anything to do with these policing committees, if some other department were to receive a call about that, they know to send it our way. So the select board's office is totally well-versed and ready to answer questions about that. And if some other poor department gets it, they usually things they don't know, they send our way anyway. So we'll be ready for that.
Got it. The survey itself, just for everyone knows, does list Professor Schaffner's contact information as part of the kind of standard human subjects protocol. They can contact him. And when they did the survey, went out to Medford and Somerville, residents did email him saying, is this real, or what's this about, or how'd you get my name? So I asked him to track that stuff for us, so we'll have a sense of if people are contacting him with concerns or whatever. We'll be aware of those.
Devin, can I ask where the press release went out? I'm wondering if it went out, like usually when we do publicity for an event, people send it to the school PTOs, to the town meeting list, I'm trying to think of other town lists or venues that it goes out on.
So this is specifically media related. This goes to the Globe and to the Herald and to the Patch and to all of our media contacts, WBZ, as well as anyone who has signed up for alerts on brooklinecovid19.com. But when I publish the press release to the website, I can also send it out on the town meeting listserv that we have through the town website, as well as there's an old blog on the town website called What's Up Brookline that sometimes we post information to as well. But I've actually asked our contact at JGPR to send over a nice PDF version so that it's not the back end version if you folks want to be sending it around to your networks as well and not just the link.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, that'd be terrific. And Eitan, in that earlier point, if folks do have questions that Dr. Schaffner can't respond to, or more for us than they are for him, feel free to loop me in and I can help respond to those as needed.
Absolutely.
Yep. Great. I also, in the chat for panelists and attendees, put the Brookline Patch article for anyone searching for it at home. It's titled "Brookline to Survey Residents to Help Reimagine Policing in Town." So you can also check that out, anyone out there listening right now. Great. Any other questions about this? Okay, moving on. Let's find out what's been going on with our subcommittees. The very first one is actually the Departmental Analysis Subcommittee. Eitan, I think that's you.
Yeah, well, I mean, we don't have a huge update. We're having a meeting coming up this coming Thursday, and we are on track to be putting together a document first at the subcommittee level, which we're then going to share with the task force that makes a series of recommendations, and provides the kind of the backdrop for those recommendations. That's our goal. I think we're going to have, I'm guessing I don't know, 5 or 6 page document with some essentially literature review, but that sounds boring. You know, the foundations for recommendations and some recommendations, and so hopefully that will fold well into a larger document. I think that we'll have a draft of that in the next couple of weeks. By Thursday, we're going to each put our own components on. Our goal is that by Thursday, when we're meeting next, the members of the subcommittee are going to prepare their segments of this subcommittee report, and we'll see how they fit together, and we'll talk through them, and then we'll see how far away we are from sharing that with the broader task force. But I think we're on track. We're kind of at this moment, we're mostly engaged in individual work, but I think everyone knows their tasks.
Great. You know, I'll just add that one of the things I'm working on is getting more information about. There are a couple communities right now that are looking into transitioning traffic enforcement from police departments to a civilian body. One of those is Cambridge, just across the river. And I spoke yesterday with City Councilor Jiven Sabrino Wheeler, which is one of the city councilors that's sort of pushing that forward, that issue forward through the Public Safety Committee, along with Quentin Zonderman, another city councilor there. I've got some notes. I'm going to start putting those together. I'm also speaking this afternoon with Rigel Robinson, city councilor in Berkeley, California, and they're working on something similar. And so I'll put all those notes together. We'll discuss that at a departmental analysis subcommittee meeting, and then bring that information forward to a full to our full task force meeting. The other thing I want to note is, and I'm not sure if this link is going to work for you, but I'll give you the details if it doesn't. Cambridge City Council actually held one hearing on this last month, an initial hearing, sort of top level, just, you know, early thoughts about this. I just put a link in the chat for panelists and attendees. Those that are watching, that are looking for this, it includes a video of the hearing. It was on Wednesday, October 14th. The Public Safety Committee over at City of Cambridge. Folks might be interested in watching that. I'm going to be looking through that as well, taking notes, learning what we can learn about, understand members of the ACLU and other organizations were there at that hearing to weigh in on these proposed changes. So if there's something we can learn from that, we certainly will. So I encourage you all to check that out. Again, I'll get this information all to you by next week. We'll include it in the packet so everybody has a chance to see what I've seen and learn from it.
Thanks. Let me just jump back in for 1 second. I do have an update that what's happening yesterday and today at the with regard to the survey is that the mail house is printing and stuffing the letters yesterday and today. So that means the letters are going to go out early next week, not that they're going out today. So it's really going to be at the end of next week that folks are going to get them in their mailboxes.
Great. Sounds like even more time for us to spread the word and make people aware that they're coming, which is great. Good. Anyone else from the Departmental Analysis Subcommittee want to weigh in? All right. We'll be touching base again next week, and we'll have more to share with you all. Any questions for us? Feeling good. All right. So next up, Envisioning Community Engagement.
Yeah, why don't I get us started on that, and then again can call in other folks from the subcommittee for an update. You may recall last week we had the opportunity to talk with Lieutenant Pastor, Chief O'Leary, and then Officer Pilgrim. I feel like coming out of that conversation, we got a little bit of homework that we needed to do as a subcommittee to follow up on some of the themes that were brought up during that discussion. I wanted to say at the outset that during our discussion, we met with the Community Services Division. There are multiple divisions, obviously, within the Brookline Police Department, traffic, detective. In speaking with the Community Service Division, I think that was largely anticipated to be a catch-all for a number of the divisions in the Brookline Police Department. Our charge, at least at that time, was not to speak to each of the divisions. So I just wanted to offer that as a caveat that we spoke specifically to the community supervision. Coming out of the homework that we needed to do was largely to follow up, do some more discovery work, especially with some of the source materials from the Brookline Police Department based on themes that were raised during the discussion. And I think my takeaways having had the chance to do that discovery work, discussing with other subcommittee members, that it feels like we're largely talking about 3 general anchors for the community engagement work as it currently exists right now, largely around complaints, commendations, and outreach through social media. And so we had a chance to do just a little bit of work following up on each one of those themes or each one of those anchor areas. Commendations figured pretty prominently on the website for the Brookline Police Department. It was striking, at least for me as an observation, that there isn't kind of an analogous process where there's a good emphasis on commendations received. There's a lot of material that you can go into on commendations received. Doesn't feel like there's an analogous process of, based on complaints, what is it that we are learning about, thinking about doing differently, and how has this affected the strategies that we're implementing for policing and public safety? Second is, during our discussion with Chief O'Leary, Officer Pilgrim, and Lieutenant Pastor, one of the themes that came up pretty quickly in the course of the discussion was the veracity of complaints and the degree to which they may or may not be founded in the investigation that goes along with each of those. And we went back and took a look at some of the underlying materials that exist on the Brookline Police Department site. There was a document that was seemed to be the most definitive, was a 2018 complaint process review, the findings of which, or the conclusions of which, were that the civilian complaint process, and I'm quoting from the document, the civilian complaint process is operating effectively and in compliance with policy. Also taking a look at some of the underlying data between, I think, 2013, 2016, roughly 50 to 55% of the complaints, I think were given an unfounded designation. So one of the things that was just striking to me coming out of that is I think for a number of the reasons that you articulated quite well during our last task force meeting, Raul, to the degree to which people are participating in the complaint process, and whether or not we're actually getting the superset of how the community feels through that complaints process. The degree to which stuff is not included in that process and it is going to be an important consideration. And then the final just thematic anchor around social media and outreach was largely related to the work that the Brookline Police Department is doing in terms of, I think they described it as being able to demonstrate the hard work that the department is doing, humanizing police department. All of those things feel particularly important, obviously, for us to have an understanding of the work that's happening. I came away wondering more about the degree to which that is a strategy that lets us know about the police department, but does not let the police department necessarily know about the rest of the community. And so if that were something that the community said, we need you to do more on social media to tell us about the work that you're doing, that would be one thing. If it were, is that actually a community-driven strategy, or is that something that is initiated on one side of the equation? So those were kind of the discovery work, the thinking that we've been doing since the last meeting. And then I think Bonnie may have some additional stuff to fill us in on for our work.
I do. Excuse me. So I passed around an article that Anne dug up called Community-Driven Models for Safety and Justice. And it was really impactful for me, obviously. I sent it around to you guys. And I think, we haven't, as a subcommittee, gotten to speak about it as a group, but it's, to me, it seems like a really, really good overview of how we should be conducting ourselves as far as envisioning and reaching out to our neighbors. And it lays out lots of mistakes that people doing this work often do, and different ideas to be successful, like putting the community in the driver's seat, you know, centering efforts around directly impacted stakeholders, you know, pitfalls therein, and then different models. I'm not versed in this to give you a great report on it, but I think that going forward, it is my, I propose that we model ourselves around these ideas. This is not the first article I've seen with these ideas, but this is the most succinct.
Do we lose Bonnie?
Yes, she's frozen.
Okay. While we get Bonnie back, Devin, can we post those in a place that makes sense on our website? The two documents that Bonnie sent along.
Yes, I think I just have the community-driven models PDF, and that was kind of with the files, but I'll put it, do you want it on the task force page or on their subcommittee page?
I think on the subcommittee page makes sense.
Okay.
That way folks can find it. There's gonna be a lot of information on the task force page.
I think it applies to the whole task force as well. So I would advocate putting it in the whole task force page, but
I've got no problem with that. That's fine. Yeah, that's fine. All right, we'll see if we can get Bonnie back. I'm sure she's doing the whole logging back in thing. Okay, cool. Great. Were there other reports out of this subcommittee?
Yeah, so we're going to be, like Eitan's update, we're going to be moving the direction then of having to come up with a cohesive set of recommendations that we can make back to the larger task force imminently. And so one of the things that it feels like we've had the opportunity to do some discovery work about what is actually happening for community engagement work. I think we've raised as a subcommittee the need for us to have, whether it was going to be a virtual event, whether it was going to be to the degree that we could pull it off, an in-person event. But I think part of the struggle that we've been navigating is that that this isn't, as we've talked about in previous discussions, numbers may not necessarily be the way that we come to any real authentic decision making about what we do as for a community engagement work. There are going to be plenty of numbers that say things are working fine. There's going to be some subset of that says things may or may not be working well. We need a way to adjudicate that whole distinction between it's not a majority rules as the path through. And the second, this is just my humble recommendation on this, is that I don't know that we necessarily have a way that we've arrived at to try to figure out how can we center the voices of people who are typically marginalized by structures that don't necessarily serve them well, but then make sure that we don't end up kind of grabbing that rail of feeling like we're trying to take away other folks' feelings of public safety. That feels like that's a recurring theme back for us. So how can we recenter some voices in a way that doesn't require people also to come into a Zoom and kind of recount for the nth time a painful story about their experience. We're trying to get to the point where we can actually hear from the community about what is it that you want the public safety to look like that doesn't look like right now. And I think when we were talking about a public event, we hadn't quite triangulated in on how to do that well. And so I think that that's still going to be something that we need to come back to as a subcommittee, is if we do have that virtual convening, how are we going to do it in a way that centers the voices that we typically don't hear from, and allows us to ensure that we still don't grab that third rail of people feeling like something is, their motivation is to take something away.
Hey, Bonnie, welcome back.
Hi. Should I continue?
Yeah, please do.
All right, sorry about that. But in that break, I realized that I had some notes that I had taken. So community-driven models for safety and justice. It gives definitions of things like community justice, which offers an alternative path that runs contrary to traditional powers of structures, focusing on generating creative solutions by following the leadership of the people closest to public safety challenges. Centering community stakeholders in justice reform efforts requires these partnerships to be structured intentionally, respecting the leadership of community players rather than including them as an afterthought. And simply put, a community-driven approach to public safety requires public officials, policymakers, and other leaders to be open and receptive to finding new and creative ways to step back and follow the community's lead to implement bottoms-up solution. So these, I mean, in my view of a perfect process, this is what it would look like. That's what it would sound like. This takes a lot of time in relationship building, which is what we've been working for these weeks. And I, you know, there's a lot more to that, to those ideas. Let's see what else. Participatory justice has its foundation in participatory budgeting. It aims to support residents of neighborhoods most affected by concentrated poverty, crime, and violence, and criminal justice system presence in defining how safety should be delivered in their communities and to make government systems responsive to that vision. This model involves engaging with an organization of residents of neighborhoods most affected by crime and heavy criminal justice system activity, a democratic process for identifying alternative strategies for delivering safety and justice, and the commitment of a government partner to implement the identified community priorities through spending and or policy changes, data analysis of both the status quo and proposed new policies, and ongoing evaluation of the process. Its implementation and its impact are also components of this model. So yeah, that's where I'm at in my mind, and that's kind of a documented this article is a more thorough description of all these things we've been talking about this whole time. So now we have good information to be able to write about these things. And so as we move forward with the community engagement aspect of this work, it's been a struggle for me, as I've voiced before, being in both the Walk and Talk Committee and this one, trying to think about how we engage the community while differentiating ourselves from the Reform Committee's work, because I think that's really, really important, because I believe people will respond to, or people might be hesitant to respond to something that is more centered from policing or centered in policing than what we're trying to do. And an idea that struck me the other day is that branding ourselves visually might be a good idea, to think about all of the outward facing documents that we put forth with the same description of who we are and what we do, and some basic things like a color scheme and a font, so that whatever we put out into the world can be collectively visually able to be connected to all of our other work. I put that out to Raul and to Kristen, and so I'm hoping maybe you guys have some thoughts on that. I am willing to give that a whirl. I am in no way a graphic designer, but I am an artist. Those two are not the same, or don't come together necessarily. But I'm happy to give that a swing, because I don't know that we have the funds to be able to hire someone to do something like that. I would also love to see a website for us, because it's so hard. You can't get all our information onto a flyer. you can't describe who we are, our intentions, and whatever we are putting the flyer out for, and have, expect people to read it. So it's crazy to imagine that I'm going to be able to do all that, but I'm going to endeavor to do that work, to think about how we can do that in the most basic, in a basic fashion. And I'm curious about what y'all think about that.
Floor is open. Alexander.
I think that's a great idea. That's something I've been thinking about a little bit, just in terms of going between my own two subcommittees, being like, even just the font that we're using looks different. It's difficult to immediately identify what a document is sometimes if you have it printed out, if there isn't like a standard format for a header. I think this is something that might be pretty easily solved, because I'm also sensitive to the fact that we've got varying levels of comfort with technology. I think this is something that might be well solved by a Microsoft Word template, where you have, I don't know, a logo at the top, but one way or another, it's the same format, it's the same font. It's got at the top right here, select from a drop down the name of your committee, something like that. And it could be a relatively small amount of work along those lines.
Yeah. And it would be, if I was able to pull off a website, the Walk and Talk committee is, we're going to have a Google form, we're going to have, possibly a Google Voice number, a separate email, all that information can be organized under our umbrella of the task force.
I'm sorry, super quickly about the website. Are you referring to our subcommittee websites on brookline.gov?
No, I'm talking about WordPress, super basic template that, separate from the town, connected to the town, but separate, so that we have control over how easily people can access our information. Because I'm sure and the town knows very well that that website is not, it's not easily accessible, even to someone like me who is quite engaged in the town. So, I want to be realistic about my bandwidth to do this work, but I think if I enlist some help from some other people I know, it might be possible. It might not be the most beautiful thing in the world, but it might be effective. Yeah.
Any other thoughts?
I think yeah.
All right, Bonnie, let's you, me, and Devin check in on this and see what's possible. Also, trying to figure out what, if we wanted to go this route, what kind of staff support we might need. This is outside of the normal parameters.
I think I did check in with Devin about this, and yeah.
Right.
Yeah, let's talk.
All right, Malcolm.
Oh, I was just going to say, I'm certainly not the tech person to lean on, but just for clarity's sake, I think, I think back to that September 30th, there was so much that people assumed we were doing and didn't know. And it's not always a clear line. What is reimagining work versus reform? And so, yes, even something as simple as like a color scheme and a font change helps people identify. I think about Brookline, like kids can identify which teacher by the heading they use. Oh, that must be Mr. Grandy because he always does that and puts his name in a box. And so I just think of simple things like that could really help us in terms of what we're trying to put, sort of what face we're putting forward. Because I'll talk later about this. I don't want to use too much time, but I think that's part of the issue I'm coming to around, particularly the subcommittee work, but even with us around like the work of Brookline Police versus what community understands.
I see it already. Reimagine Brookline.
Oh, and I will volunteer a child that I pay tuition for. Who's really good with graphic designing. I mean, she's a gamer. Her stuff is a game design. So she's not a web designer. She's not, but she's made plenty of flyers for me, and she's still living in my house, and I pay tuition for her. So we can put some teeth into that.
Love it.
That's great. Okay, anything else from our Envisioning Community Engagement Subcommittee, or any questions for them? I do want to respond to something Kristen mentioned earlier, which was about the issue of complaints and the police department website. That's actually something I know that Michael Zurab from the Committee on Policing Reform has brought to our attention. And I know Mel Kleckner, our town administrator, who can't be here today, but had mentioned that they're aware of those issues and that they're being worked on. And I think what Michael was drawing attention to was how incredibly easy it is to issue a commendation or to recommend an officer for commendation, but how incredibly difficult it is to actually lodge a complaint. And that's something that absolutely needs to get worked on. The other piece was the complaint process itself, which I know is also being addressed. And I know that at least in the past, numerous select board members have talked about how that process is inadequate. I've certainly talked many times about how in need of change that process is. I've called it broken. It just doesn't work. It's and it needs serious repair, if not reimagining. I know that there is a committee on a subcommittee on the Committee on Policing Reforms that's taking that up. And I'm looking forward to seeing the product of their work, because that's an area that I'd like to see not just minor tweaks to, but some real meaningful changes to that. So we'll see how that goes.
Can I ask a follow-up question on that, Raul? And I'm just wondering if you can give us then some guidance on how we think about the domains of work between this task force and the other task force. I think, as Malcolm has reminded us, it's hard sometimes to navigate the line between what's reform versus what's reimagining. The complaints process, if we have some public records documents that say that the complaints process there are no issues and it's operating with fidelity, and I think that suggests that it's operating with integrity. That's in the public, that's accessible to the public, that's out there right now. And there may be then different opinions on that. So is that we would give it over to the reform committee because they happen to be working on it? We have some responsibility that we can look at it differently, regardless of what the reform committee is thinking about. Like, I think it would be some guidance on where would something like that land between the two task forces would be helpful.
Yeah, I'd recommend talking with someone over in that subcommittee that's working on the complaints process and sort of seeing where they are, getting a sense of what they're working on, whether or not there's space. I mean, there's some overlap with the walk and talk work, for instance, and I think it's appropriate that we look into that as well as the reform committee. We've talked even last week about ideas like a civilian body overseeing policing, in particular issues with policing, police complaints. So I think it's fair game. I would just encourage if it's the subcommittee on envisioning, community engagement, or whichever one it is, to talk with them about what work they're doing, and then to figure out what part of that work we want to take on, and just be in communication with each other, if that makes sense. you know. But this is a critical issue. I mean, it's an absolutely critical issue, and you know, as a select board member, I expect to see some meaningful change in this area. Nipping around the edges just won't be enough. Almas.
Yeah, I was just going to add on to what you were saying, Raul, about connecting with the reform committee, because I know from what I hear and when I attend the meetings, there are the complaints. Some of the complaints also relate to our subcommittee, like, you know, where they're interviewing people with perhaps, you know, mental illness, unhoused people, things like that. So it would be really, again, if we can kind of connect and find out more about those things, it'll help us when we develop our recommendations as well. So just going to add that piece.
Great, thank you. Okay, we can circle back if there are more questions. I want to make sure that we have time for our other subcommittees, and the next one on the list is school resource officers. Who's taking the lead there?
Sorry. So we turned in our report, so that should be available to anybody who wants to read it. And I think it's quite a good summary of the subjects we've been discussing and sort of the context in which we've been discussing it. We put in a pretty significant summary of what we've found so far about the history of the SRO position. We're setting up meetings with the current SRO at Brookline High, Caitlin Keneally. We're setting up a meeting also with Michael Downey, so he could come to one of our public meetings and talk with us about the, so there's a statute, SROs are required by statute. Near as I can tell, based on my quick look, that statute's only existed and been in effect since 2015. So we're hoping to get some answers from him about where are our boundaries in terms of reimagining this position, so that we're not violating that statute. We talked a bit at this week's meeting about about this placement of the SRO, and that's been a long discussion over the last few meetings about how the SRO got moved to its current position. We talked a little bit about the current survey about the SRO that is out for people to respond to. And I think we're moving forward pretty well. We're hurt in some ways by the fact that we haven't met that many times. So I think things are going to develop more rapidly from this point on. If anybody else wants to speak up, by all means.
Yeah, I'll share a little bit. I've been really fixated on not just the history, but just sort of oversight and accountability. And I don't mean that specifically about the SRO who's there now. I mean, in terms of like the sort of evolution of how we got there. I did talk with former headmaster Bob Weintraub pretty extensively about what he remembered. I mean, he came officially in '91 as the assistant headmaster and was there until 2011. And so, he really had seen all the transition almost up until there was a school resource officer, and talked about, Brookline High and community building with the police, building relationships with the police with Chief O'Leary and others. And so he really helped fill in a lot of history, but there's still a lot of gaps that, I mean, granted, he couldn't answer everything, and nor is he supposed to, but like when I reached the school committee, Robin Coyne, who's the assistant, she said there's very little on there. She sent me some links to check. And she's right. I mean, there's just a couple of policy things that are in from the school committee. And so then it sort of got my wheels spinning, like, so who ultimately thought this was okay, right? Like, was it the police? Was it the superintendent? On the memorandum of agreement, we have a police chief who only lasted 2 years and an interim superintendent signing it. And so my real wonder is, like, did school committee actually endorse that, right? Also, what became really clear in talking was the term SRO is thrown out a lot. The town has one true SRO, and that's at Brookline High School. Now, there are police who engage and go into elementary schools. And again, there's very little known, like from school committee and others, like what exactly is that? What exactly is the curriculum? Who's driving that curriculum? Is it schools? Is it police? And so for me, there's a lot of, I don't know, this always happens in research and interviews, right? Like you turn over one stone and you find 1,000 more, right? Like, so those questions are really sort of bubbling for me as I have these conversations. And then I have a couple of other conversations. Bob Weintraub just suggested I talk to Mr. James Cradle, who it'll be hard to be objective. He is not just a mentor to me, he's a family friend for a very long time. He's known me since I was about 3 years old. So, you know, it'll be hard to be objective, but he will tell me the truth in terms of what he remembers in his experience from 72 to 2007. And I'm talking with Rasan Hall from the ACLU finally at 11:30 this morning, and he'll give you some more sort of US SRO perspective, as well as some Massachusetts law perspective, you know, that I can bring to our meeting on Monday.
Great. Questions for this group? You know, one of the things I think we've seen throughout this process is in a number of different areas, whether it be walk and talk or SROs or perhaps even other programs, is and that I'm clear on, at least as far as the work that we've done so far, is that I think we need to expect better record keeping. First of all, this committee, this task force, and its subcommittees have spent a lot of time working, and Dan in particular, and others, trying to track down MOUs and records to, you know, in some cases which still have not been found, and which may not even exist, and we're not exactly sure necessarily if they do or don't. So that at a minimum. But also, when we do have information, really making sure that there is a thorough rationale that's grounded in community needs for each and every program that we have, regardless of what those programs are, and that is clearly stated, that it is at some point voted on by somebody that has oversight, whether it be a school committee or a select board or whatever the case may be, housing authority, et cetera. And that there be a period at which that document is reviewed. And it doesn't seem that has happened over time. It doesn't seem that there's been that process that I just laid out does not necessarily seem to exist in the way that I've laid it out, at least. And there might be some internal review going on that the rest of us aren't aware of, but certainly not public review of those agreements, of the rationale for this. Do we still need it? Some of these programs were created many, many years ago. And it's not altogether clear that they're still necessary, but we continue doing things apparently until this point without thorough investigation and review. And that's something that is right and proper, whether or not there's a public dialogue on policing or public safety. It's right and proper, if we're going to create programs, to be very clear about what their purpose is, to make sure that those are grounded in community needs, and to ensure that there is a regular review of those programs to make sure that they're needed and also meeting the goals that have been established for it. That does not appear to be the case in many of these instances. And so if folks haven't seen, there is an MOU with the schools. Devin, I'm wondering, I know that this is this was in a packet for one of our previous meetings. I'm wondering if we can't just add it, if folks are looking at this particular meeting and maybe looking at the report from this subcommittee, if we can't also just add that MOU in there, so folks will have an opportunity to see it without having to go find it elsewhere. Is that okay?
Yes.
All right, great. So Malcolm, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, I after like looking more, I think that's the only MOU we're gonna find, because there hasn't really been another school resource officer besides that. And so while there seems to be influence and acceptance by schools with police coming in and doing other things, I don't think we'll actually find another memorandum of agreement, because there's nothing that seems, at least from administrational and elected position standpoint, to merit another memorandum of agreement. Right? Like I don't like the fact that I can't find it with school committee, and that I only got it through the head of school at Brookline High School. And I know Chief O'Leary also shared it with us as a committee, but I mean, like the fact that that's all we can find, I don't actually think there's another one, because I don't think prior to that there was a feeling to actually have another memorandum of agreement. Right. And I could be wrong. I mean, I could be misjudging, but you know, yeah.
Alexander?
Yeah. So obviously I'm looking forward to being schooled on this by Michael Downey, but based on my look at the statute and the statutory history, an MOU was required as soon as an MOU is required by statute for SROs and has been since 2015. There was an update in the Criminal Justice Reform Bill in 2018, which profoundly lengthened and made more specific what the MOU had to include. Before that, it was just like there needs to be an MOU. So, Malcolm, I think you could absolutely be right, and I think I would also not be surprised to find like a little one-page something for the couple of years prior to that 2019 MOU that we have. You know, indicating very much along the lines of what you were talking about, that people just weren't thinking about it, but that it was required. So I'm curious about that.
Well, there may be an opportunity to search prior records too. Sort of correspondence between the maybe head of school or superintendent and the police chief or leadership at the police department, to see if there's more information there.
I would just say that's also a really scattered time from I would say an upper admin school structure. In 2015, we had an interim superintendent. 2016, we hired a new superintendent. I'm pretty well stated on record to think I am still blown away by who in the world thought he was capable of being superintendent in our town. But you know, the school committee did. He lasted barely 4 years and then left. And now we have an interim superintendent. So with a huge amount of turnover, like we've turned over human resources multiple times. We've turned again, I do have an email to our now interim superintendent, our now interim human resources, and our head of school to help with such documents. But yeah, and just frankly, I'm not going into town hall to dig through their stuff right now. Right. I mean, I'm not. Robin did share, again, it means digging electronically. I mean, she did share like, you know, where I could find all the school committee notes from meetings and other stuff like that. I'm gonna try and get some help so that I'm not purely looking for a needle in a haystack. Like I know when the MOU was signed, I know when she started. I'm not clear when the talks happened, but.
And you're talking about Robin Coyne from the school department?
Correct. She was very helpful with what she could, but she, even up front in her email, she was like, you know, there isn't a whole lot.
Kristen?
Yeah, I just wanted a quick observation just based on something you were saying earlier, Raul. I think that the charge, I think, of this group when we first convened is you asked us to be sure that we're engaging in an evidence-based process. And I think that we're obviously spending a lot of time trying to array the evidence for us to be able to propose changes. And I think the thing that I'm struggling with is continuing what we're doing requires no evidence. Continuing what we're doing just requires that all of these muddled agreements, all of this very vague, how do we get to this particular point, doesn't require any marshaling any evidence for things to continue as they are. And so I think part of the challenge that we have then is when we see something like what Bonnie was introducing as part of the community-driven model for community for policing and public safety, we're spending a lot of effort trying to array evidence for why this could work, and it's time consuming in the worst possible time for us to be doing discovery and evidence gathering just because people can't convene. But I think it's just striking for me. I mean, it's the challenge of community organizing and political work. It's the status quo requires no evidence to continue. Proposing the change requires that we spend this time arraying evidence, and it's just a particularly difficult task to engage in.
Right. You're here. Other thoughts or questions on this? I'll say I had a chance. I know we just received the report late last night, and that's when I read it. So I had a chance to look through it. I think it's great. There are also recommendations for continued work. So know that this is as Alexander mentioned, this is a work in progress. And you'll see some of the recommendations for continued work. And certainly, I would say it's a great time. I think now, but you all are the ones on the ground doing the work. But to start to bring in the school committee into this conversation. I know there's some questions about to what extent was the school committee involved in the decision to did they review this MOU? Or are there any votes taken about school resource officers on the school committee side? Those are questions that are certainly outstanding in my mind, and I know that we're going to need answers on. So good time to do that, and really thinking, starting to think about what a public presentation of your findings might look like, and receiving feedback from members of the public on these findings, what that might look like as part of our overall community engagement strategy. I think it's going to be really important. Great. Okay. Next up, we have our Vulnerable People and People in Crisis Subcommittee.
I can start and others can jump in. So basically, we this past week, we just worked on our recommendations, preliminary recommendations that were due as of today, and it was sent to Devin last night. And it is in your packet. So if you want to scroll through, I believe it's towards the bottom of the packet, page 102, I believe. And really just, again, you could look at that, but we ended up, we have an introduction about what our scope is and who we are. And then we met about 7 times since October 1st. So you'll see that. We had interviewed 2 stakeholders. You've already heard from us about the 2 interviews that we've had with Annabelle Lane and Lieutenant Jennifer Pastor, as well as the community for Brookline Center for Community Mental Health. So that's in there as far as the interview highlights. And then we also have some review of literature. Again, just we interviewed many articles and attended Zoom calls on this subject, but this just gives you a bit of the highlights as far as the things that we really wanted to put in there for the preliminary report. And then we have our next steps. We know we kind of came up with what we know, and then some of the questions that we still have that we need to work through. And then some of our next steps, we want to continue meeting with people. We want to bring back the Brookline Center for Community Mental Health, as well as the CIT folks from the Brookline Police Department. So I think, again, you could walk through that and see if they. So Alex and Anne, did you want to add to anything?
I think our next step is we've accumulated all this information. We've interviewed some important stakeholders, in Brookline in terms of crisis support and also in terms of what's missing from our community that we could potentially put in place to alleviate the need for so much crisis support i.e. if we provide vulnerable people in our community with the resources they need to live their lives, have food, access to healthy food, have a place to live, have other supports and services in place, then there would likely be less crises. And we wouldn't need necessarily to expand a crisis support. We may still, our charge is to think about ways that we can provide crisis support without having the police doing it. So that's one piece of what we're looking at. How do we potentially create a different kind of crisis support for people when they need that kind of support? But also, what can we do as a community to help support people prior to them becoming in crisis? We talked last night about how we've been kind of focusing on a mental health crisis support model, which is partially because that's how the CIT program in the BPD is set up to support people in a mental health crisis. And that we've spoken with the Brookline Community Mental Health Center, whose model obviously is also around mental health, but that only gives us one piece of potentially a larger issue, is that, how do we define crisis? How do we define supports and services? How are we looking at people who don't have a place to live? How are we, how can we reach out and engage and support people who don't have a place to live, who are dealing with addictions, that kind of thing? So to broaden the scope a little outside of just mental health, moving forward, I think is an important piece. And also take into account what we've learned so far and start thinking about what we could propose as an alternative. Alex, did I summarize that okay?
Yeah, I think you summarized it well.
Yeah.
Thoughts or questions for the subcommittee? I'll just start by saying that I thought the report you provided was thorough, was terrific. I really appreciate the review of the interviews that took place as well. They were really helpful for those that I couldn't make, to be able to see to hear some of the perspectives from the folks that you spoke with, including folks from the Brookline Center for Mental Health, which I thought were really illuminating. And then thinking about this as not just in crisis but pre-crisis, I thought was really terrific. So pre-crisis, and then how do we handle issues when there is a crisis, understanding that will still happen despite our best efforts on the pre-crisis side. So we need to think about both. I thought that was terrific. And then again, your next steps and questions for further review. I was looking back at our charge, and one of the things that I remember being in there was looking at alternative models. You've already started doing that, which is terrific. And we included, and this is for all the subcommittees, in the U.S. and abroad. So make sure when you're doing this this literature review, this search, that you're looking at models abroad as well as in the U.S. and to see what we can learn from folks outside of the U.S. that might work here. But this is so far so good. Any other questions or thoughts for the subcommittee?
Also, we're trying to articulate and get a grasp on what is pre-crisis, what is crisis. So somebody who doesn't have a place to live is in crisis, right? They may not be calling, to get crisis support services, but they're already in crisis. So crisis can have a lot of definitions and meanings, and how that is framed within the scope of our work is important as well. In terms of international models, there are definitely international models. When I've been doing kind of lit review stuff, I've been thinking more North America models, because it seems potentially more doable to go with something that is being done in similar types of governmental systems. It's going to be hard to, I think, we're really looking to change the model we have now in a significant way. And in order to propose a different model, it might make it a little bit easier to get support and be able to give evidence behind a model that's working in the US or Canada per se, as opposed to the whole world. Though there are definitely a lot of innovative types of models out there that are being done internationally as well. But just practically speaking, for what we're going to propose here, it seemed to sort of behoove doing a lit review of other cities and towns in the US, or that have a similar type of governmental structure and things.
All right. Going to move on. Thank you for that, and thank you for the report, everybody. I know that these reports from the two subcommittees we just talked with just entered your reports, the packet last night and this morning. So please review and think about what questions you have for next week about those reports. Okay. Please take your time to look through those. The final subcommittee will be the Walk and Talk subcommittee.
Okay. We are also submitting our initial report today. I don't think Devin has gotten her hands on that file yet. So our last meeting, we spent all the time organizing ourselves for this report, gathering all the materials. Here, I'll put it in the chat again. So if you would like to look. There you go. That is the Walk and Talk subcommittee's initial report. So in that, should we talk about that, or is there another spot to talk about that?
No, please do.
Okay. There's a lot of information because Anne is an overachiever, very thorough. And I'm so thankful for her for doing this. So we lay out our subcommittee charge and our objectives, which are to understand the Brookline Police Department's objectives as well as the BHA's objectives for the Walk and Talk program, to understand community's experience of and perspective on the Walk and Talk program, to gather ideas from the BHA community about how they might reimagine their public safety, research other community solutions, and of course to make recommendations. And then we lay out the highlights of all of our 5 meetings that we've had. Most notably, October 21st, I've bullet pointed the information gathered from our informal discussion with Chief O'Leary and Sergeant Hatchett, where we discovered things like Walk and Talk officers don't go through any formal training prior to the assignment. It's mainly officers that express interest are the ones that are brought into the program. there's no specific qualification for the assignment. They need to have a good personality, quote unquote, to get along with people and be willing to serve. There is no formal data review of the program to date. There are no formal efforts to assess the perspectives and experiences of the BHA and other communities that receive walk and talk services in the 30 years of the program's existence, other than the officers attending community meetings and meeting with BHA leadership teams and other opportunities for the community to reach out to the police department, that it puts all of the onus on the community to be able to express their views, which is seems to be the characterization of all of the programs that we're examining. And so in the description, in that particular conversation of what walk and talk officers do, relationship building, a quote was following up with families and responding to needs such as food insecurity and advice on dealing with children. So it's, it's fuzzy. It's clear that relationship building is definitely important to the officers doing this work. They clearly love that work and like doing it and see its importance. But it's not clear to me that that is the same coming from the opposite direction. It doesn't mean that it's not, it just means that I don't have any evidence right now that has been gathered by the police department to know that the communities they are policing feel the same way. And I want to make sure that this is not just a tool for the police department to be able to build relationships so they can not be disliked in the community because their job is to discipline people. I want to make sure that we examine, obviously how that tool is being received. We also discovered that the Brookline Police Department receives $15,000 from the BHA annually. And then, let's see. We have a list of identified organized stakeholders and resources. This is a partial list. This is a brainstorm. I'm sure it doesn't include everybody. It doesn't include individual community members. It doesn't include the community as a whole, or, these are, like I said, the organized stakeholders that we could think of, and other community businesses or organizations that may interact on a regular basis with the communities that receive the walk and talk services. So these are potential avenues for communications and helping us build relationships and gather information. And then we have literature review and notes, where maybe Anne could talk for a second about her literature review briefly, or not.
I looked for articles specifically on walk and talk programs, and I didn't find any. And maybe they use different names across the country to, for this type of programming. But so I looked at community-based police programming, and that I didn't find a lot on the perceptions of the people who that these community-based programs are directed at. what their perceptions of these programs are, what their experiences are, because we're interested in following up. Next steps are doing interviews with folks who live in BHA communities and to hear more about their experiences and perceptions of the Walk and Talk program. So I was looking to see if there's any literature out there on that. There probably is, and I just didn't dig deeply enough, but on first search, I didn't find a lot. I did find one interesting study from a couple of years ago on resident and police perceptions of community policing in a Midwestern town, where the thing that stood out to me from that study was that there was a real difference in perceptions of community policing in neighborhoods depending on race demographics in those communities. A neighborhood that was mostly non-white was the least positive in their perceptions of community policing, and also the perceptions of the police in that neighborhood toward the residents was least positive in terms of how the community was doing there as well. In the two more white neighborhoods, there was a much more positive attitude toward community policing, and the police tended to perceive those neighborhoods as doing much better in terms of vis-a-vis the other neighborhoods. And when I read that, what stood out to me was the public forum we had at the end of September about the work that we're doing in our task force, as well as in the reform committee, police reform committee. And I took a few minutes to look through the transcript that was generated of the remarks from that public forum. And it really matched up with what this particular study that I looked at found, is that the public speakers who spoke positively of the police in Brookline were middle-aged or older white speakers. I counted 10 out of 11 of those speakers were either middle-aged or white. And the public who's expressed concerns about over-policing in Brookline and were critical of police responses tended to be younger and or Black, Indigenous people of color. 10 out of the 13 speakers were young and or Black, Indigenous people of color. And just that, and we've discussed that here to some degree, but I just thought it was a really interesting data point when I just looked specifically at who was talking to see that chasm between the demographics in our own community about the work that we're doing here. Yeah, so I mean, obviously that's something to consider going forward, how people are going to respond to what we're suggesting, but it was a real significant difference to me.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Anne. Also, we have some more notes from the community-driven models for safety and justice that I don't think I need to comb through. And our next steps, I feel like, and maybe all the other committees feel similarly, that we have been doing all this work that is hard to present to everybody, this scattered research, trying to collect all the pieces, and we're beginning to approach the point where the work can hopefully become like the real work out in the community, trying to collect ourselves as a task force umbrella with all of this work moving in the same direction. So I definitely feel that in the Walk and Talk committee. So now we have content for our flyers. We have this idea of branding ourselves, having uniform language, so that now this committee and maybe all the others can begin to reach out and collect information. So the next steps are collecting residents' perspectives, experiences, and ideas, which is an enormous next step. Conducting interviews with the Brookline Police Department Walk and Talk officers, conducting interviews with key BHS staff, reviewing previous public statements, reviewing the Walk and Talk survey data that is happening in the reform committee. And we also talked about possibly scheduling a quick meetup about sharing information between the two groups in some way that's easy, so that we have regular access to the survey data as it's coming in, and they can have access to our interviews as those come in. And then our subcommittee recommendations, and then because Anne is great, there's a list of our references for all of the above. And that's it.
Thank you. I just want to start by asking, asking a couple questions. First of all, I think it's remarkable that there's no MOU, memorandum of understanding, between the BHA and the Brookline Police Department. My understanding is neither the police department or the folks at the BHA could identify one that existed at any point in time. Yet and still there's $15,000 that gets transferred from the BHA to the police department every year. I imagine that, I mean, if they're, who knows, if their process is anything like the select board process, the board of the BHA would need to vote on that each year, but maybe they have a different process that doesn't involve that. I'd be curious as you talk to the folks, and I know that I saw that's on next steps, as you talk to the folks at the BHA to see if there's any indication that they have voted on that. Is there at least a contract that even says services rendered that is an invoice or something like that? But exactly what the understanding is between the two bodies is really remarkable that there's not an MOU there. The other thing is, and I think you're getting, you're really getting to the bottom of this, which I appreciate, is, as we think about this, as we think about the need for specific officers in a particular area, and understanding the history that this program was created in the 90s, when our views on criminal justice, addressing crime, you name public safety, were very different than it seems the direction we're moving in right now. Thinking about, were officers there and are officers there because there is either through actual crime data or because of perception that folks in public housing are more likely to be victims of crime, that they're more likely to be perpetrators of crime, or any of these factors, or is this really about a lack of trust between or real or perceived between folks who live in public housing and the police department? And are those the rationale, if not then, at least now, for this program existing? And is there a foundation? Is there evidence? If any of the above are the rationale, is there evidence to provide support that the program should exist because of those issues? I don't know, but it looks like you're heading down the right track to try to get some answers. So I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Any other thoughts or questions here?
I also want to mention that I have a preliminary meeting with Michael Alpern, who's the new director of the BHA. And yeah, I hope to be able to gather that information about the money exchange and how that is listed. It's got to be listed somewhere, and how that's defined. So coming up soon.
Okay. I know folks just got a chance to see this now. That's okay. I think it's great. What I want to make sure everyone does is thoroughly read these reports that we've received, and have questions ready for our next meeting a week from today. I think it's, folks in these subcommittees are doing, and all the subcommittees are doing really great work. And the best thing we can do for them is to provide feedback, to ask the questions that that help propel their work forward. Let's do that next Friday. But if there's something on your mind, feel free to, shoot a message send over a message to one of the folks that you heard speak about these reports, and just make sure you get those questions or comments in now. But in the meantime, I think next Friday is going to be a real opportunity for us to dig a little bit deeper into these. But these are all well done, thoroughly done. If there are no questions or comments on this particular item, I want to move to the next section. Seeing none. Okay. Next up, actually, you've all helped out with this work. Sort of, this was the discussion of the format for the subcommittee reports and recommendations. I think that these are all right in line with what certainly at least I was hoping to see. The things that I had on my list to make sure that you all are thinking about are things that I'm seeing in all of these. Real introduction to the work, and what the objectives of your work are and have been, the scope of your work. That's all I think I see in the 3 reports that we've looked at. Historical context, and based on what you can find out, is really important. I think as we present the final report, there's going to need to be a lot of that in there, this historical context, because people are going to be learning about these various programs and understanding the history of them, in many cases, for the first time. And so having that context is critical. The literature review, we've been calling it, sort of looking at what's out there, what others are doing in other parts of the country or the world. There's in this last one, I was just doing some quick searching while Anne was talking about sort of public housing and policing, and there's a good deal of information there. So including those pieces in there, I think are great. The direct research that you've been doing, interviews, but also like primary sources, documents, news reports, all that kind of stuff is really helpful. And then of course the recommendations that you're still working on, but also what are the next steps, areas for continued work, those kinds of things. Is there anything besides what I just listed and what you've seen from the 3 reports that we've seen today that you think should also be included in these reports?
Well, I'll just, sorry, we have some things going on around here. I would just say that folks should from every subcommittee should look at the survey and tell me what they want extracted from the survey, like if there's particularly a survey question from the survey document, a set of questions, a particular analysis that you want to kind of fold into the subcommittee report. I think that'll help us be more efficient in like I can extract that information and provide it to you as I'm going through the analysis.
Great. The other thing that just come to mind now, and Chris will get you, is data, and I've seen that in your reports too, like whatever data you're able to get your hands on, agreements, things like MOUs and any other agreements that are out there, so those primary source documents, and then also legal analysis too. And I know Michael Downey has been helping us with some of that. Chi-Chi Wu has been helping us with some of that in the departmental analysis subcommittee, but looking at the regulatory framework here to the extent that it impacts our work will be important too. Kristen?
I had a rather specific question to Eitan, so I can hold it if you prefer till later on.
I think go ahead.
So when we were having the discussions about implementing the survey, one of the things that that was central to people who were both proponents and had some concerns about is the degree to which the oversampling was going to yield the results that we were after. And so it feels like that is a pretty central tenet of our being able to do this work in a way that yields results that starts to lift up, especially voices from Brookline's communities of color. And so I'm curious to know, you're asking Aton if there's anything that people wanted to know from the survey. Is the oversampling, how soon will we know whether or not the oversampling is leading to some of the anticipated outcomes in getting the data?
Yes, good question. So I think we'll start to know within, again, once we have that 80% chunk of the data, we'll know that, you know, what kind of representation we have by, say, racial group. So I think we'll know pretty soon. Yeah. Sorry, I have to go for 2 minutes.
Any other thoughts on what we want to make sure that we see in future iterations of subcommittee reports? I don't know if I mentioned it or not, but obviously also sort of detailed explanation of the community engagement that has been part of this work is critical too, and I see that there as well. So continue that. Hey, Alexander.
I think one thing that would be really helpful, and I'm just sort of, feel free to shout me down on this, but I was thinking about this in terms of the website that you proposed, Bonnie. I'm sensitive to the fact that we're producing a lot of material. I mean, a lot of material, and particularly the folks who are going to be attending town meeting are going to be reading our material along with a lot of material on other subjects. And I think it's important to make it really accessible and easy to find. And I'm thinking more about that in terms of the website. Maybe we can help like organize some of the links around our minutes and what have you better. One thing maybe we could do is, if we can, write like a couple of line summary as part of our future reports. That is, here's our overarching, here are the core things that we're concerned about, sort of like an elevator pitch. That's like, that someone can say, oh, I'm really interested in that. Let me go click on the report and read it. I think that could be a useful thing to sort of have all in one place, because we have so many subcommittees. So you can say, oh, I know all of these, they have all these reports. Their core concerns are X, Y, and Z, and I can go read them if I click here. And maybe that's sort of unhelpfully flattening the work that we're doing. But I do think there's a strong flip side of making it more accessible.
Can I just jump in on that point? And sorry, I had to, I ran away for a second. I think along those same lines, we should start to make a document that just has a list of our recommendations. And that's, you know, and we're adding to, I think that the justification is for a recommendation is probably long and belongs with a longer conversation, but for our sake, as well as for other people who are reading our stuff, I think we just need to start getting a clear sense of what those recommendations are going to be and how they interact with one another.
But we're so far away from that.
Well, but probably in the next month, they're going to start trickling in, right?
Yes, hopefully. Yes.
I think that's a good point. I like the idea of having a really dynamic site that showcases the work to date, that includes what we've been including on the Brookline ma.gov page, but maybe makes it a little bit easier to get to some of these, what would you say, Alexander, core concerns? I wrote key issues, but then core concerns sounds better. And of course recommendations, but also even perhaps provides an opportunity for people to comment and share their thoughts on our work in a more dynamic way. That certainly makes sense to me. We just have to see, it looks like we've got some folks willing to work on that and help make that happen. You know, I'm happy to support that in any way that I can. I think it'll be a good idea. Other thoughts here? So I'm gonna move on. We've got time for any new business that folks want to bring up. Okay, and dare I do it? Malcolm, go ahead.
I think it's been said, but one of the things I'm really trying to think about as we reimagine is where accountability lies when new things are happening. So in specific to like the school resource officer, it's still really unclear where accountability lies in terms of like who developed the idea, where did it come from? Did it purely come from, you know, that Massachusetts law? Or was it something, you know what I mean? Like, and it's so unclear, not just, I mean, personally, as a historian, I'd want a paper trail. I understand we live in an electronic world and that doesn't exist as like a lot of my research has happened in my life. However, you know, we live in, you know, a very fluid community, and it's been so exponentially compounded in this SRO that's visible, right? So, you know, the law comes in 2015. We changed police chiefs. We've now had 4 superintendents between interims and actually hired, right? We changed headmasters at Brookline High School or head of schools. Like, you know, I wonder if part of our reimagining can be somewhat old school in the sense of like, you have to have a public record where you can even validate that. And so I think, you know, I don't think that's actually reform to say that to select board. Because to me, the reform is, you know, is actually lighter than that. Like, I don't think that's reform to say that to school committee. That if you're going to actually have police in there, then there has to be a public document of curriculum that parents can know what's happening. And then, like, you know, and then on the town side, the select board should know exactly what the police are pushing forward as curriculum if they're going to be oversight, or maybe, you know, they reimagine and say it's apparent they can't do oversight. But to me, what I'm really seeing is there's a lot of stuff that's sort of flying beneath what our structures are saying hold people accountable. And it's a way to actually say, like, okay, like, you know, it's not just about police being transparent, right? Like the obvious transparency would be, well, police institute help put a school resource officer at Brookline High School. That can be seen as transparent, but that whole process behind that is far from transparent, nor is there any accountability to it. It's just sort of like, there was a law, this happened. And even then, we can't get full clarification on the law and what it exactly means. And so I just, more and more, I'm feeling like, you know, I don't know. It's always been funny to me, you know, when schools do this, or when police do this, or when other institutions say, oh no, we're way more transparent. Look at all these things. And I'm like, who is judging? Right? There's a lot of people who tell me all the greatness about Brookline High School, and I don't disagree with it as much as being on the inside. I also hear all the complaints and know what's wrong. And know, like, you know, I don't get into whether it was better at a different time or whatever, but, you know, if only other schools are judging me, or only the parents within the community are judging me, then that's not actually enough to say I'm doing a good job, right? I have an oversight, I have an evaluator, I have something like, and we just don't seem to have any of that structure that is actually transparent to community in a way community can actually access. And so, yeah, I mean, that's, you know, that's where I'm landing in this moment. Like, how do we reimagine all that and then influence public safety? Yeah.
I would say briefly on the legal piece. I mean, I've read this statute a number of times. I haven't seen anything in there that requires an officer to be inside a school. The requirement is that there be one school resource officer. And I'm interested in hearing the discussion at a future a subcommittee meeting. I know Michael Downey will be there and provide more expert analysis than I'm providing right now. But nothing that requires an officer to be inside the school, placed inside the school. And that there's a requirement that there be one school resource officer. It's not at all clear in there that even needs to be a full-time job, that could be somebody as part of their work that is detailed to be the liaison to the schools effectively. And that's my reading of the statute. Looking forward to that discussion at the subcommittee meeting. Chi-Chi.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on what Malcolm was saying in the context of the fact that it may be we do have some boundaries imposed by state law in terms of what's required, because there's similar considerations with traffic enforcement, it turns out. And that is ultimately, this discussion of public participation, of being community-centered, of transparency and engagement might be the strongest form of reimagining we have, given sort of the parameters that are set for us by state law. That it may not be so much as restructuring individual functions, but restructuring how police and community engage in terms of oversight, feedback, and transparency.
Thanks, Chi-Chi. Alexander?
I do want to quickly say, as we encounter these statutory issues, like, it is not out of the question for us to put together as part of our recommendations a wish list of state law changes, right? Like, there's a lot of people thinking about this. They're thinking about it across the state. We're not the only town that's thinking about this. And we're certainly not the only people. They're thinking about it in the state legislature right now. Tommy Vitola has attended our meetings. We can ask our elected representatives to come to our meetings. We can ask them to come to one of these once we've put together sort of a list of pitches and talk it out with them. And I think that could be something that we could put on our agenda down the line.
I'll say, popping into the chat, it's in our charge. Make legislative recommendations to our state and congressional representatives. So it's well within the scope of our work to do just that. Other thoughts? A-Time?
Are you soliciting general thoughts right now?
Yeah, it's a good opportunity.
I've been trying to do this gut check since last week's meeting that I don't know how I feel about it, which is that, like, from last week's conversation about with Chief O'Leary, I keep thinking that, like, I know that I feel comfortable at any hour of day or night walking around any neighborhood of this town wearing what I'm wearing right now and feeling safe. Certainly safe from police harassment. I can walk in any neighborhood at 3 a.m. wearing this hoodie. And I still don't know where in our work we're going to evaluate the degree to which people of color feel that way or don't feel that way, and where we are going to get to the place where we are making a recommendation for how to provide equity on that dimension. And I just don't, I mean, where is that going to come in? And maybe that's not our priority or the reform committee's priority, but, like, to me, that's sort of the most visceral thing that I have in mind from last week's meeting, that, like, I know I have that feeling. And by the way, that's probably, I think I could walk in any neighborhood of in Boston too, anywhere, and never feel at risk of harassment or intimidation from police. Yeah, Bonnie.
I think that's exactly why we have the reimagining, right? Because it's impossible to do that. It's not going to be possible to wash clean what already exists as perception of an armed officer in uniform in town. In my personal opinion, it's not going to be possible to wash that away.
But what are we doing targeting that? Like what, and again, maybe that's just not high enough on the priority list, but like, so it's okay if it's not, but like.
It's everything though, isn't it? It's
It
everything.
is, but like, I'm just thinking like, is it like, what is the sum of the parts, right? Like, is the stuff we're doing in department analysis, the stuff we're doing in community engagement, like, are we getting there?
Yes.
But Eitan, I thought that's among the things that I thought, at least in trying to aspirationally do the oversampling and aspirationally trying then to elicit responses from folks about what their perceptions of public safety and how we are choosing to implement policing. And then also, if we as a community engagement subcommittee are trying to then navigate complaints and commendations, which the numbers cannot allow us to get to the point where we could probably have enough numbers of the points that you're concerned about to surmount the numbers that get to the commendations and expressions of policing is just fine.
Well, I think we're going to actually, I think, so if all goes well on the survey, I think we will have a good answer to people's experiences now. I don't think that the survey is going to get us, and the survey is not designed to get us how we reimagine to, assuming there is this problem is, and we have support for it in the data, and we also like just have support from it from other points of information. Suppose we can articulate this as a problem that needs to be solved. I don't know if in our recommendation program we're getting there. Maybe through a different kind of complaint process or future ways that I don't know. I just feel like I think we're gonna. I have some confidence we're gonna get more information about what people's current experiences are. I don't know if we are doing. Who among us is doing the work to address what to do going forward on that.
Just want to quickly make sure that Bonnie gets to finish saying your piece.
Bonnie,
I'm not sure if you were done earlier, Bonnie.
Oh, I don't remember. Lost my train of thought. I think that you're right that the way forward is not clear because the map comes from the community, and we haven't. Like I said before, we have all these. We're building the base upon which to stand on to move forward by understanding all these things, that there aren't contracts, there aren't agreements, there isn't a list of things that the police need to accomplish that their programs can be assessed from a community perspective, or really any perspective outside of the Brookline Police Department. So now that we're beginning to solve that, the two committees that I'm in are very community engagement. That's the whole thing, is community engagement. So now is the enormous work of reaching out to our neighbors to understand what their experiences are, and to have these discussions around what they would hope to receive and define as public safety, so that we can say, well, if an armed officer isn't necessary for that, we can, with all this research we've been doing, what do you think about this? Or maybe they have an idea. And I hear you that the timeline that we are working on is tight and absurd, that we might be able to have a whole product by the end of this. That's an enormous mountain to climb, but we are going to try. But I say also that, a product that comes from this can also be a roadmap, like a solid roadmap and solid commitments to continue this work to, I don't want to make any promises for anybody here, but this work is not going to end. It's not going to be able to end at the end of this task force. This is an enormous project. So hopefully that answers a little of your question. I think we are right now, we are primed to be able to reach out and get that information that will help us develop those recommendations. That's why I said that, you were talking about starting a document that begins to have those recommendations, but I don't have any of them, and we're nowhere near that right now. That's what I meant by that. Does that clarify anything or help at all?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say that. Yeah, I guess I'm just curious from Raul about whether that jives with your expectations of what we're going to come up with.
Yeah. I do think that the discussion we're having right now needs to appear somewhere in this report, that the ultimate goal here should be at least elements of what you said, Eitan, making everyone feel the kind of safety that you're able to feel in our community and elsewhere, without risk of harassment or intimidation, as you said, and that hopefully by the time we reach February, we'll have some recommendations that inch us in that direction. But it is likely, as Bonnie said, that there's going to be much more work to do beyond February to get us to that place. There's no question about that in my mind at this point, that there's going to be a lot more work that's needed to get us to that place. But there are, when we talk about, we talk a lot here about armed officers, and I just want to be clear, when I say armed officers, I don't just mean the fact that they have a weapon, but it's also the power to stop, to detain, the power to touch, to literally put your hands on someone. All of those things. It's not just about a gun. It's not just about a weapon. And that all of that is captured in that sense of fear, or what we can name it different things. All of that is captured in there, and so I think we have to start looking more and more. I think we are, in some cases. We're looking at the role of officers in their engagement in schools. We're looking at the role of officers in their engagement specifically in public housing. We're looking at the role of officers in traffic enforcement, which is one of the chief ways that we see through our data that motorists of color are disproportionately stopped by police, not just last year, but going back many years. One of the areas that bias is most apparent. The more we start to make distance, I think, it seems to me at this point, between officers and members of the public, except when it's absolutely necessary, right? The more we make that distance, the more room to breathe people have. It seems to me, the more the less they have to fear when just walking down the block. I mean, I was here in where I live now, and this was just last night, and I came back into this room to grab something, and instead of flicking on the light, I used my flashlight, and I was like, I had that thought that went through my head. Are one of my neighbors, my new neighbors, gonna think I don't belong here because I'm in a dark room at night using a flashlight in a place where I live? And then I started thinking, well, if I had different identities, if I was a different age and a different race, would my neighbors even concern themselves with it? I should not have to think that way in the community where I live and pay taxes and volunteer my efforts and my time. I just simply shouldn't have to think that way. That's the place where we need to get. We got a long way to go before we're there. But I do think that some of this work around reimagining different ways to solve to address what are maybe important issues, folks going too fast, things like that, finding different ways to do that still keep everyone safe, but make sure that folks from communities of color, in particular, and others, don't feel that sense of intimidation and fear from not just the state, but also their own neighbors. That's the goal. And so, let's keep that in mind as we think about our recommendations. Do these recommendations help get us closer to that goal? I think that's going to be critical.
Thank you. I hope you didn't mind me bringing up that gut check. I just keep going back to it.
Yeah, no, it's really important. I'm gonna go back to this video and watch what I just said to make sure I hold myself accountable for all those things too. Yeah. 9:57. Any other thoughts before we need to go?
Yeah, I just, not to harp on that point, but I just want to say quickly that this conversation, I'm thinking, is very profound. And yet, on the other hand, the individual pieces of what we're thinking about in terms of restructuring, moving a function from the police or changing the role isn't gonna get at it. But perhaps this idea of continuous engagement with community members will. Because I think even having this task force and having these conversations may make some difference in terms of these issues of being aware where these biases and stereotypes can lead to. The problem is our charge ends in February. How do we make sure these conversations keep happening so that the police, the community is always aware to be on guard for these biases? So just a thought there.
Yeah, that I think will need to show up in our report too. The words I just wrote down: continuous engagement based on what you said, but also transparency and oversight need to be part of that. Right, much more public sharing of data that we have around policing, not as part of this, just as part of our work, but going forward, and then some person or persons with more direct oversight, civilian oversight of what's happening there, I think would be important too. So, all right, folks, 9:59. This has been a great conversation. We're back at it next Friday at 8 a.m. Look forward to popping into some of your upcoming subcommittee meetings. Thanks for all the great work that you're doing. Seriously, just really tremendous work, really thoughtful work, which is important. And we'll have more to say come next Friday. All right. Talk to you soon, everybody. Take care.